When my son married, I never told anyone that my late wife had left me her ranch. Keeping it secret turned out to be wise, because 1 week later, my daughter-in-law arrived with a notary. But the moment she learned the truth, her smile vanished. At 8:40 on a Monday morning, I stood in my own kitchen, in front of my own sink, and swallowed one of the pills my daughter-in-law had put in my pill box. 2 different professionals had told me not to. One of them said it could kill me. I did it standing up, with tap water, wearing the flannel shirt Carolyn bought me for Christmas in 2019, because I wanted to be dressed decently in case it went badly. It tasted like chalk. It went down easy. Then I wrote the time on the back of a King Soopers receipt, 8:41 a.m., folded it into my shirt pocket, and drove towards Swedish Medical Center with my hands shaking for the first honest time in 3 weeks. I made it 4 miles. I was at the pharmacy counter at the King Soopers on Broadway when the fluorescent lights started humming too loud, and the linoleum went soft under my boots like a floor I once condemned in Pueblo, and a young woman in a green apron asked if I was all right. I remember saying, "Call 911. My daughter-in-law poisoned me." Save the receipt in my pocket. Then the floor came up. I was a structural engineer for 41 years. I retired at 66 with a pension, a paid-off house in Centennial, a 1998 F-250 with 214,000 miles on it, and a wife raised on a ranch in the San Luis Valley who never once in 51 years let me get away with an unearned opinion. Carolyn taught 4th grade for 30 years and could read a person in 10 minutes. She was right about Victoria the night she met her, at an Olive Garden, when Victoria spent the whole dinner asking what our house had appraised at and calling it so charming, so much potential. She was right about Brad, too, which was the hardest thing she ever said to me. He's not cruel, Rich. He's just soft in the middle. He'll go wherever he's pushed. She died on a Tuesday in March. Pancreatic. 51 years, and it took 11 weeks. None of what I did next came from being clever. It came from 41 years of knowing that when a beam is failing, your feelings about the beam are irrelevant. You instrument it, you measure it, you get numbers a stranger can read. That's all I did. The night I watched that footage, I did not sleep, and I did not call the police. I sat in my study until 4 in the morning with the sound off, watching the same 41 seconds maybe 30 times. What got me wasn't the swap. It was how ordinary she was. One glance over her shoulder. Steady hands. At one point, she paused with the amber bottle in her hand and scratched her ankle with her other foot. That's when the fear came, not the anger, because a person doing that for the first time doesn't scratch her ankle. At 6:15 that morning, I drove to a 24-hour Walgreens 2 towns over for nitrile gloves, Ziploc bags, and a spiral notebook. In my truck, I gloved up, opened the organizer with a butter knife, moved 4 white pills into a bag, and wrote the date, time, and source on it with a Sharpie. I put the rest back exactly as I found them. Then I logged it longhand, the way I used to log a site inspection. Date, time, what I observed, no opinions. That notebook was read aloud in a courtroom 9 weeks later. I never once wrote the word evil in it, and Mitch says that's the reason it worked. The first professional I brought in was Anil Gupta, PharmD, who has filled my prescription since 2011 and who once stayed late on Christmas Eve to fix an insurance problem with Carolyn's antiemetics. I didn't tell him the story. I put the bag on the counter and asked him to identify the pills. He looked at the imprints under a lighted magnifier for a long time, then asked me to come around the end of the counter, which he'd never done in 14 years. "Mr. Alden, where did you get these?" "My own weekly organizer." He took off his glasses. "This one's clonazepam, probably a milligram. This one's cyclobenzaprine. Neither is on your profile. You've never had a benzodiazepine from us. What would they do to me? With your metoprolol? At your age?" He put a hand flat on the counter. "Sedation, confusion, slurred speech, unsteady gait, and falls are what kill men of 70, and you would have no idea it was happening. That's the part I want you to hear." I asked him if it would look like dementia. Anil Gupta is a careful man who does not editorialize. "Sir, if you walked into my pharmacy on that, I would think you had dementia." Driving home, I built an explanation. I actually did, at a red light on Arapahoe Road. Maybe her own prescription spilled in her purse. Maybe she mixed them into my box while organizing it, thinking she was helping. People always ask why victims don't act sooner. It isn't stupidity. It's that the other explanation is unbearable. So your mind builds a shed to keep it in. The shed lasted 9 hours. At 4:40 that afternoon, I pulled footage off the second camera, the one on the credenza in my study, and found a clip from the previous Saturday I hadn't looked at. Victoria at my desk, in my chair, phone on speaker, low, and a spiral-bound legal pad in front of her. She wrote on it for 11 minutes. I paused it and zoomed and cleaned it up as best I could. It was a list, and I recognized the handwriting immediately, and it was not hers. It was Brad's. My son made that list. Victoria was adding to it. Dates down the left side going back to early June, weeks before the wedding, with short entries beside them. Called me by David's name. Left stove on and burner too. Couldn't find truck keys. Found in freezer. Repeated story at Pueblo Job 3X at dinner. 9 of them described things that never happened. One was the freezer, which I now knew she'd staged. My son had been keeping a symptom log on his father since June, in his own hand, and handing it to his wife so she could improve it. I went out the sliding door and stood on the back patio in the cold with my hands on the railing, and I wasn't angry yet, I was something worse. That physical drop you get in an elevator. I had to sit down on the step. I remembered him at 9 on the ranch, refusing to get on the horse. Carolyn crouched down to his level. Brad crying, not because he was scared of the horse, but because the other kids were watching. He'll go wherever he's pushed. 2 days later, I tried to fix this like a normal person. I drove to the Arapahoe County Sheriff's substation and told the deputy at the front desk that my daughter-in-law was drugging me. I had the labeled bag, the notebook, and a thumb drive. He was young, polite, genuinely trying. Did I live with her? No. Did she have a key? Yes. My son gave her one. Had I seen a doctor? Not yet. Then he asked the question that changed how I understood all of it. Sir, has she filed anything on you? Guardianship? Conservatorship? Anything like that? I said not that I knew of. He told me a version of what I'd hear 3 more times that month. Family matter. The video only shows a woman touching a pill container. The substance needs lab confirmation. First step is a referral to Adult Protective Services. He gave me a case number. It's in the notebook. 24A19442. He did do one thing that mattered. On my way out, he came around the desk and said quietly, Mr. Alden, don't take anything out of that box. And if you've got somewhere else to sleep there. Adult Protective Services called me 8 days later. 8 days. Meanwhile, I called Mitch Gallagher, 68, estate attorney on 17th Street in Denver, 34 years at the bar, and the man who'd handled Carolyn's family's affairs since her father died in 1994. He is not warm. He has a framed photograph of a mule in his office and no photographs of any human being. I brought him the notebook, the pills, and the thumb drive. He watched the kitchen clip twice, then closed the laptop and looked at the ceiling for a while. Richard, 3 things. Go. 1. What you have is enough to horrify a jury and not enough to charge a case. A defense attorney will say you mixed up your own medications, and that's not a stretch. It's the most common thing that happens to men your age, and she spent months building a file that says it. 2. She hasn't filed anything yet, which means she still thinks she needs your signature. The day she decides she can't get it, she'll stop trying to get it and start proving she doesn't need it. That's when you're in real danger. 3, he took his glasses off. The pills mean she isn't waiting anymore. Nobody does that on a 5-year plan. She's on a clock, and until we know what the clock is, we're guessing. He hired Sarah Kwan that afternoon. Sarah Kwan is a forensic accountant. 14 years with IRS criminal investigation before she went private, and she carries a thermos and no small talk. She asked for 4 things: Victoria's legal name, her brokerage license number, any LLC she'd ever mentioned at a dinner table, and permission to spend money. It took her 9 days to find the clock. While she worked, the thing inside my house got worse in a way that's hard to explain. Victoria got kind. That's what nobody expects. She stopped pushing the power of attorney and started coming by twice a week with groceries. Rotisserie chicken, bagged salad, reorganizing my shelves while she talked about her listings. And she refilled my pill organizer every Sunday, cheerfully at the counter while I thanked her. Every Sunday night around 11, I put on a glove, emptied her pills into an evidence bag, and refilled the box from my real bottles, which I kept in a locked toolbox in the garage. In the morning, I'd take my actual medication in front of her while she watched over the rim of her coffee cup with an expression I can only call tender. We did that dance 3 weeks. I lost 11 pounds, not from the drugs, from the performance. I slurred slightly. I reached for a word, landed wrong, corrected myself, embarrassed. I let my left hand tremble on a coffee cup and stay steady on a screwdriver because resting tremor and action tremor are different things, and I didn't want a doctor catching me in a lie. I have never been so tired as I was pretending to be a dying man in front of my own son. And Brad watched all of it and never asked me one question. That's what I can't get past, not the conspiracy. If your father starts slurring and calling you by your uncle's name, and you believe it, you get him to a neurologist inside a week. You don't write it on a legal pad. He didn't take me to a doctor because he already knew what a doctor would find. My second attempt to fix this was Brad himself, and it cost me more than the police did. I called him on a Sunday and asked him to drive me to a doctor's appointment. I made it easy. I said I was worried about myself and I wanted my son there. I was handing him the exit. If he sat in a waiting room with me, then whatever else was true, he wasn't gone. 4 seconds of silence. Then, Dad, that's great. That's really great. Let me have Vic set it up. She found a place, they specialize in this. She's already got the paperwork started. I'd rather go to Dr. Hoyt. He's had my chart for 20 years. Hoyt's a family practitioner, not his words. Hers, coming out of his mouth. You need a specialist. Vic's on top of it. Brad, Dad, don't make this a fight. I said, Son, do you remember what your mother said to you the day before she died? He said he had to go. They had people coming over. I sat with the phone in my hand a long time. My chest hurt in a way I told myself was not cardiac and probably wasn't. 2 days later, my doctor's office called to confirm a records release I hadn't authorized. I drove down and made them print the whole chart. There were 4 phone notes I'd never seen. June 11th, July 2nd, August 19th, September 6th, each logged by a nurse, each the same shape. There were 4 phone notes I'd never seen. June 11th, July 2nd, August 19th, September 6th, each logged by a nurse, each the same shape. Daughter-in-law called Ray. PT's increasing confusion. Reports PT left stove on. Reports family considering memory care. Advised PT should be seen. 4 months of building a medical record by phone, using a receptionist as her stenographer, sitting in my own file on my own doctor's letterhead. The office manager was mortified. Victoria had been listed as an emergency contact since 2022. Brad added her. And phone notes from family are documented but not diagnostic. Not diagnostic. That phrase is going to be on my headstone. Sarah came back on a Thursday and set a manila folder on Mitch's conference table like it was heavy. Victoria was 32, licensed since 24, and until 3 years ago legitimately good at her job. Then she stopped selling other people's buildings and tried to build one. 28 boutique condos in an old warehouse district with her own name on it. Every bank turned her down. So she took $3 million from a private hard money lender called Halloran Bridge Capital at 19%, balloon payment, confession of judgment, and, underlined twice in Sarah's notes, a personal guarantee. 14 months later, the city pulled her permits over contaminated soil. The contractor walked. Halloran called the note. The balloon was due December 1st. Sarah had the payoff to the dollar, $418,600. She also had a demand letter from Halloran's Collections Council and a 2009 federal conviction, extortionate extension of credit, attached to one of Halloran's 2 managing partners. It's not a mob movie, Sarah said. It's also not a bank. These people lien everything you'll ever own, and one of them did 14 months for leaning on a man in Commerce City. She isn't scared of jail. She's scared of December. Then Mitch slid one more page across the table. A letter of intent, signed by Victoria 6 weeks earlier, offering the senior water rights on 5,000 acres in the San Luis Valley to a Front Range water export outfit, subject to seller obtaining authority to convey. She had already sold my dead wife's water. She just didn't have the authority yet, and the authority was me. $45 million in the Rio Grande Basin, and every irrigator in that valley fighting 100 years to keep that water in the ground where Carolyn's grandfather sank his well. I sat in that conference room and thought about an afternoon in August of 1979. Carolyn's father walking me out to the pivot in a straw hat, showing me the adjudication date on his decree like a birth certificate, 1889. He tapped the paper and said, "Rich, land's just dirt. This is the ranch." She was going to pipe it to a subdivision in Douglas County to pay off a building that didn't exist. That was the day I stopped thinking about protecting myself and started thinking about the other thing. It all came apart on a Friday. Mitch called at 7:20 in the morning. He never calls before 9. She filed Arapahoe County probate, petition for appointment of emergency guardian and special conservator for Richard Alden, alleged incapacitated person, filed Thursday at 4:51 p.m. on 8 minutes before the clerk's window closed. Attached, a physician's certificate from a Dr. Lamar Petty, whose office sits in an Aurora strip mall between a vape shop and a nail salon, dated October 8th, describing a 40-minute examination. I have never met the man. On October 8th, I was in Alamosa, 6 hours away, walking fence line with Ruben Sandoval, who leases grazing on the ranch and remembers the day because we had to pull a heifer out of a bog. Also attached, a sworn affidavit signed by Bradley R. Alden. Mitch read me 2 lines over the phone, and I asked him to stop. I've read the whole thing since. It says his father can no longer safely manage his own affairs. It says his father has become hostile and delusional, accusing family members of theft. He signed it the way he's signed his name since high school, with the loop under the B. Filed as an emergency, so the hearing wasn't 3 months out. It was the following Wednesday at 10 a.m. in front of Judge Amelia Pruitt. 5 days. The court appointed a court visitor, Colorado procedure, a neutral who interviews the respondent, a woman named Karen Detmer, coming to my house Monday afternoon to decide whether I could manage my own life. Here's the box I was in. The strongest evidence in the world would have been a documented level of a drug in my blood that I had no prescription for. I didn't have it. I had pills in a bag any defense attorney would say I put there myself. I had video of a woman touching a pill container. I had a notebook in my own handwriting, which is worth exactly what the mind that wrote it is worth. And there was now a court filing saying my mind was gone. To get the blood level, I had to be drugged. And if I let her drug me before Monday, I'd sit in front of a court visitor slurring, and she'd recommend emergency guardianship, and it would be over. That was the trap, and Victoria had built it without knowing she had. I asked Mitch whether we could get the pills to a lab. That gets us a substance. It doesn't get us into your body. What if I take one? Long silence on that phone. Richard, as your lawyer, and then as a person, do not do that. Saturday morning, I called Dr. Owen Baptiste, board certified in medical toxicology, 22 years, on staff at Swedish, brought in by Mitch to review the pill identification. He was blunter than Mitch. 1 milligram of clonazepam plus 10 of cyclobenzaprine in a 70-year-old on a beta blocker. Your pressure drops. You fall. A quarter of men your age who fracture a hip are dead inside a year. I'm not being dramatic, sir. Don't. I asked him a different question. If a man walked into your emergency department under his own power and told the triage nurse what he'd taken and when, and you drew serum, would that be admissible? He didn't answer for a second. More than admissible, he said slowly. Unimpeachable. Hospital draw, hospital chain of custody, timestamps in the record, treating physician's note. No defense attorney alive can argue with that. Thank you. Mr. Alden, please. I spent Saturday night on the back porch with a beer I didn't drink and Carolyn's reading glasses in my shirt pocket, which is a thing I'd started doing and never told anyone about. I ran the arithmetic because that's how I think. Do nothing, and I'd likely be under a guardian by Wednesday afternoon, and the water would be gone inside a year, and the promise I made holding her hand while a machine beeped at us would be broken. Do it, and there was a real chance I'd end up on a floor somewhere. I'm 70. One wife, one child, one career, and I'd already lost 2 of the 3. That's not bravery, that's arithmetic. So Monday morning I opened the organizer, and for the first time in 3 weeks I didn't swap anything. You know what I did next? One thing I left out. Before I picked up the keys, I called Mitch's office and left a message on the recording, out loud, with the time, saying exactly what I'd swallowed. He played that voicemail at the plea hearing. 22 minutes in, my mouth went dry and my hands went still, which is a hell of a thing. The tremor I'd been faking for 3 weeks quit the second something real was happening. 29 minutes in, I got in the truck. That was the reckless part, and I'd take it back. The woman in the green apron was named Delia. I've sent her flowers twice, and she refuses to accept them. I remember ceiling tiles, a paramedic's voice very close. Richard, stay with me. When did you take it? And me getting out 8:41 pocket, a tourniquet snapping around my left arm, serum draw at 9:52 a.m., benzodiazepine positive, cyclobenzaprine positive, no corresponding prescription in 9 years of pharmacy records, 11 hours on fluids and monitoring. My pressure got down to 84/51. I never quite hit that floor. Delia got a chair under me. Dr. Baptiste came down that afternoon and stood at the end of the bed watching the monitor for a while. That was extremely stupid. Yes. Do you want to see the number? He turned the screen toward me, and I looked at the serum report, and I cried in front of a man I'd met on the phone 2 days earlier. I hadn't cried since the funeral. I think it was because for the first time in 4 months there was a piece of paper in the world that said I was right, and it didn't need one single person to believe me. Karen Detmer was scheduled to see me at my house at 2 p.m. that same Monday. She saw me instead at 6:15 p.m. in Bay 9 at Swedish, sitting up with a saline lock in my arm, my attorney in the corner, and a medical toxicologist on speakerphone. She was maybe 50, canvas bag, the flat patient manner of somebody who does this 11 times a month. She explained she was neutral, not my advocate, not the petitioner's, and that she'd be filing a report with the court. Then she asked me to tell her, in my own words, why I thought Victoria had filed. I asked if I could answer with documents, the notebook, the pharmacy identification, the 4 phone notes out of my chart with dates, the symptom log in my son's handwriting, freeze framed off the study camera, freezer entry circled, wedding date beside it. Then the serum report from 4 hours earlier, while Dr. Baptiste explained off the phone on the tray table what a clonazepam level does to a 70-year-old man's cognitive testing, and how neatly it would show up in a 40-minute exam in a strip mall. Then Mitch handed her the October 8th certificate and a signed statement from Ruben Sandoval about a heifer in a bog in Alamosa County. She wrote for a long time. Then she asked me something that had nothing to do with any of it. "Mr. Alden, who does your grocery shopping?" "I do. Tuesdays. King Soopers on Broadway. Produce is better and it's 4 miles. She looked up. "Which is where you collapsed this morning?" "Yes, ma'am." She wrote that down too. Her report went to the court Tuesday at noon. 4 pages of dry, careful, devastating language. One sentence is taped inside my kitchen cabinet. The court visitor finds no evidence of incapacity. The court visitor is compelled to note that the documentation submitted in support of the petition appears to have been manufactured, and recommends the court refer this matter to law enforcement. Manufactured, a neutral, in a filing. The referral went to Detective Ray Solano, 21 years with the Arapahoe County Sheriff's Office, the last 6 in the unit that handles crimes against at-risk adults. He came to the hospital Tuesday morning before I was discharged, and the first thing he did was apologize for the substation. "That case number should have come to me 3 weeks ago. It didn't, and I'll be finding out why." He sat down on the rolling stool. "Here's what's different today, Mr. Alden. 3 weeks ago, you had video of a woman opening a pillbox. Today, I've got a hospital serum level, a court visitor's finding, a forged physician's certificate filed with a court, and a pattern going back to June. That's not a family dispute. In Colorado, that's theft from an at-risk adult, criminal attempt to commit assault in the 2nd degree by unlawfully administering a drug, and attempt to influence a public servant, which is its own felony, and one judges take personally." Then he asked what I wanted. Not what happened, what I wanted. "She has a notary coming to my house tomorrow at 2. Solano's head came up, because even with a hearing pending, Victoria had booked one more run at my signature. Brad mentioned it himself. God help him, trying to be gentle. "Just cleaning up paperwork before the court thing so it doesn't have to be a whole ordeal, Dad." Wednesday, 2 p.m., my living room. "Bring your reading glasses." And Sarah had already run the notary. Not a bank notary. Arthur Vance, 61, who held a Colorado law license until 2011, disbarment, misappropriation of client funds, and who now made his living stamping documents for people who couldn't get them stamped anywhere else. 2 civil judgments and a 2019 complaint to the Secretary of State about his journal. A woman with a guardianship hearing at 10 Wednesday morning was going to notarize a power of attorney in my living room at 2 that afternoon, which told me she thought guardianship hearing at 10 Wednesday morning was going to notarize a power of attorney in my living room at 2 that afternoon, which told me she thought she'd win at 10. She didn't know about the serum report. She didn't know about Karen Detmer's 4 pages. She spent all Tuesday inside a version of the world that had ended Monday at 9:52 a.m. Solano looked at Mitch. Mitch looked at me. "Do the cameras still work?" Solano asked. The hearing on Wednesday morning took 19 minutes. I sat in the 2nd row of Judge Amelia Pruitt's courtroom, in the suit I bought for Carolyn's funeral. Victoria came in at 9:52 in a navy dress, with Brad and a young attorney from a downtown firm who I'd bet my truck had no idea what was in his own file. She glanced back at me once and gave me a small, sad smile, the kind you give somebody in hospice. I didn't give her anything back. Judge Pruitt had the court visitor's report, that's all it took. She asked one question about the October 8th physician's certificate, and the young man said he'd need to confer with his client, and Judge Pruitt said something I'll remember with pleasure until I die. "Counsel, I've been on this bench 11 years. I want you to understand what I'm looking at because I don't think you do." Petition dismissed with prejudice. Certificate referred to the district attorney and the state medical board. Victoria ordered to show cause on sanctions. And on the record, in the court's view, the filing was an abuse of the guardianship process against a competent adult, and she would not have her courtroom used as a weapon. Her attorney asked for a continuance. Denied. Out in the hallway by the elevators, with about 9 people standing around, Victoria turned to her own lawyer and said, loud enough to come off the marble, "You had one job." Then she looked at Brad, gray, holding his tie in his hand for some reason, and said, "Get the car." She still didn't understand. That's what made the next 4 hours possible. She walked out of that courthouse thinking she'd hit a procedural snag with a judge who didn't care for her lawyer. She had a notary coming at 2. She never once considered canceling. At 1:52 p.m. on Wednesday, October 23rd, I was in my armchair with the television on and a glass of water on the side table. Behind the closed study door were Solano, an investigator from the Arapahoe County DA's Economic Crimes Unit, and Mitch with a leather folder in his lap. Solano had a laptop running a live feed off my own encrypted server because it turns out the best camera system in a sting is the one the victim installed himself 6 weeks earlier. At 1:58, a black Audi pulled in and parked behind my truck the way it always did. They came up the walk in a line. Victoria first with the briefcase, then Vance in a gray suit with a satchel and a limp, then my son 10 feet back like a man following a casket. She used her key. She'd changed since court. Slacks and a cream sweater, the outfit of a woman helping her elderly father-in-law with tedious paperwork. "Dad, how are you feeling? You look tired." I said I was all right and let my voice go thin. She sat on the arm of the couch, put her hand on my knee, and said the judge that morning had been confused about some technicalities, and that the important thing is we can handle all of this right here, privately, like family. She opened the briefcase. Same papers plus something new underneath, a general assignment of trust interests, which Mitch told me later was the document that actually mattered, and which is not a thing a legitimate broker carries around. Vance set his stamp on my coffee table, sat down in Carolyn's chair, and took out a pen. Brad stood by the fireplace with his hands in his pockets, looking at the mantel, where there's a photograph of the three of us at Great Sand Dunes in 1997. I let it run 4 minutes, and God forgive me, I enjoyed it. I asked her, vaguely, in the drifting way I'd been practicing for a month, whether this was about the house. And she said it. No, not the house, Dad. The house is fine. She patted my hand. It's that dead land in the valley your wife left you. It's a burden. It costs you in taxes every year, and with your health, you don't need to be thinking about wells and water decrees. Let me take it off your plate. I'll handle the sale and we'll put the money somewhere it can take care of you. Your wife, not Mom, not Carolyn, 15 months in this family, and Carolyn had become a paragraph in a title report. Wells and water decrees. She'd learned the vocabulary. Then she put the pen in my hand and closed my fingers around it, and she said softly, the way you'd talk to a dog you were about to put down, "Just sign it and then you can rest." I looked at the pen, then I looked up at her, and let my face do the thing I'd been holding back for 4 months. My hand went still. My spine came off the back of that chair. And I watched a 32-year-old woman work out, in real time, that the room she was standing in was not the room she thought it was. I said, "Victoria, before I sign anything, I want you to tell me what you think that land is worth." Her mouth opened. "Because you signed a letter of intent 6 weeks ago." I set the pen down next to her stamp. "Subject to seller obtaining authority to convey. $45 million for the senior rights on the Rio Grande. Your balloon to Halloran Bridge Capital is $4,118,600, due December 1st, personally guaranteed, and one of their partners did 14 months for leaning on a man in Commerce City." The color went out of her face in stages, actual stages, forehead first. Vance was already standing. "Sit down, Mr. Vance. You've had a rough decade. Disbarred in 2011, misappropriation, a Secretary of State complaint about your journal in 2019. This is worse than both." He looked at the front door. I said, "There are 3 law enforcement officers in this house." Behind me, the study doors opened. Solano came out first, badge on a chain. The DA's investigator went straight for Vance, who made it 2 steps toward the foyer before he was against the wall with his hands behind him. And Mitch moved Victoria's power of attorney aside with 2 fingers, like something he'd found in a drain, and laid 3 documents down in a row. The serum report from 9:52 Monday morning. Karen Detmer's 4 pages. Manufactured underlined in Mitch's handwriting. And the third one, which was the one I'd been waiting all month to watch her read. Because on October 11th, 12 days earlier, while she was calling my doctor's office and coaching my son and dropping clonazepam into a Tuesday slot, I sat in Mitch's conference room and signed the paperwork that irrevocably moved the water and mineral rights on 5,000 acres into a charitable trust with an independent corporate trustee, a conservation easement running with the water, and a spendthrift provision. Those rights cannot be sold to an exporter. Not by me. Not by a guardian. Not by anyone. The income supports 2 things, the ranch and a fund at the Rio Grande Water Conservation District for irrigators who can't cover augmentation costs. I get to live on it. That's all I get. That's all I ever wanted. She read about half of the first page. I watched her reach the words irrevocable and independent trustee and understand that even if she'd won that morning, even if the judge had handed her my whole life in a bow, she'd have been handed a dry hole. 11 weeks of poisoning a 70-year-old man to reach something that stopped existing 12 days before. Her smile didn't fall off her face. It's stranger than that. It just switched off, like a bulb, and what was underneath had nothing in it at all. She said, "That's not possible." Then she turned and looked at my son, and every mask she'd ever worn came off in one motion. I won't repeat all of it. 90 seconds, the ugliest thing I've ever heard in that house. Every word aimed at Brad. That he was a credit manager making $81,000 a year she'd married for his father's balance sheet. That she'd held his hand while he cried about a symptom log he was too weak to write, and too weak not to write. You couldn't even manage one senile old man. And I watched my 35-year-old son learn, in front of 2 officers and a disbarred notary and his father, exactly what he'd traded me for. Solano let it run. 21 years on the job. He was letting her talk on camera. Then he said said, "Victoria Alden, turn around, please." She fought the cuffs. Not seriously, she couldn't have. Twisting and screaming about her attorney, her rights, and about Halloran. Actually, about Halloran. "You don't understand what they'll do to me." Closest thing to a true sentence, she said all afternoon. They walked her out the front door at 2:31 p.m. My neighbor Wally was standing on his lawn holding a hose. He's 78. He told me later he thought there'd been a fire. Brad didn't get arrested that day. He got arrested 9 days later after the DA's office finished with his phone. He came apart on my living room floor first, on his knees by Carolyn's chair, holding my sleeve, saying he never wanted to hurt me, that Victoria told him the pills were just something to help you sleep, that Halloran had called his cell twice and he was drowning. I believe about 60% of that, which is the part nobody wants to hear. He probably didn't know the doses. He probably didn't know about the strip mall doctor, but he wrote the log. In June, in his own hand. He looked up at me and asked me to help him. I sat with my hands on the armrests and looked at my only child and could not find one thing in my chest. Not rage, not love, like reaching into a pocket you're certain has your keys in it. I said, "Your mother told me you'd go wherever you were pushed. I spent 15 years telling her she was wrong about you." He said, "Dad." I said, "You should have taken me to Hoyt." And that was the last full sentence I have said to my son. Here's what it all came to, in the language the paperwork used. Victoria Alden pled guilty on March 4th to theft from an at-risk adult, criminal attempt to commit assault in the second degree by unlawfully administering a drug, and attempt to influence a public servant. 16 years in the Colorado Department of Corrections, eligible in a little under 8. Halloran took a judgment against her for $4,118 and $600 plus fees 11 days after the arrest. They will find every dollar she earns for the rest of her life. Her brokerage license was revoked in January. Arthur Vance pled to forgery and a notary offense. 2 years, and a convicted felon at 61. He wrote me 4 pages from Sterling. I read it. I'm not answering it. Dr. Lamar Petty surrendered his medical license in June rather than face the board. The DA turned up 31 other cash-paid capacity certificates out of that strip mall. 19 had guardianship petitions attached. 19. I think about them more than I think about Victoria. Most of them were probably 85 and alone, with no locked filing cabinet and no friend who used to install site cameras. Most of them are wherever their families put them. Brad pled to conspiracy to commit theft from an at-risk adult and to perjury on the affidavit. Deferred judgment, 6 years probation, because he cooperated fully against her and was, in the DA's words, the least sophisticated participant. He works at a tire shop in Federal Heights now. He calls twice a month. I let it go to voicemail, I listen to everyone, I never call back, and I couldn't tell you whether that's strength or cowardice. Karen Detmer got a commendation from the probate bench that I'm told is rare. I sent her a card. She sent one back that said, "You did the work." I just wrote it down. Solano found out why my case number sat for 3 weeks. A routing rule in an intake system. He got it changed, then stirred his coffee a while and said, "You almost died in a grocery store to fix a software problem." I said, "Somebody had to." The scars are the part nobody puts in a video. I can't use a pill organizer. Physically can't. My hands won't open one. I'd in a grocery store to fix a software problem. I said, "Somebody had to." The scars are the part nobody puts in a video. I can't use a pill organizer. Physically can't. My hands won't open one. 7 amber bottles stand on the windowsill over the sink, and my cardiologist has told me twice that's how men double dose. And I say yes, ma'am, and keep doing it. I sleep with the hall light on. 70 years old. And every few weeks I still wake at 3 in the morning, certain they were right, that I'm confused, that I imagined it, that I destroyed my son over a mix-up. I get up, open the cabinet where Karen Detmer's page is taped inside the door, read one sentence, and go back to bed. The court visitor finds no evidence of incapacity. That's what 4 months of a woman calling my doctor's office does to a man. Not the drugs, the doubt. She very nearly convinced me, and I don't think I'll ever get all of that back. I live in the valley now. I sold the house in Centennial in May. Wally cried, which I didn't expect from a man who's been shouting at me about my elm tree since 2004. He comes down twice a year and complains about the altitude. The ranch house is 1911 and drafty, with a propane furnace that sounds like a diesel starting, and a kitchen window that looks straight up at the Sangre de Cristos. Ruben still runs cattle on the north sections and shows up Saturdays whether I need him or not. In August, the district set a new head gate on the ditch along the county road, paid out of the fund. Ruben went behind my back and had a small aluminum plate bolted to the concrete, and there was no arguing him out of it. Carolyn Sands Alden, 1889 decree. This water stays home. I go down most evenings around 7 when the light goes gold on the range and the swallows come out over the ditch. She wanted $45 million and a house in Douglas County. I've got a head gate with my wife's name on it and water that will still be running in that ditch when every person in this story is dead.